Welcome to another edition of the Weber State Democrats podcast. Today we have a special guest and the vice chair of the Utah Democratic Party, Oscar Matta. So yeah, thanks for being here.
Thank you for inviting me and having me on.
Yeah, awesome. So in addition to being the vice chair of the Utah Democratic Party, he's also former president of the College Democrats at Weber State. What was your experience being a member and then the president of the Weber State Democrats? And based on that experience, what advice would you give to me and the rest of us to run this group?
Yeah, so I was the president, I think, from 2014 to 2016. And I was kind of thrown into it. At the time, we had about 50 to 100 members, so it was kind of a lot to manage. But 2016 was a really exciting year. We had the Clinton versus Bernie Sanders. So that really brought in a lot of young people. We were able to do watch parties, stuff like that. And so it was exciting. And the best advice that I could give you guys is once you start building your club, to really work to try to capitalize on that growth and trying to keep those members up. I know about 2019 to 2020, the club kind of went inactive, and so I really applaud everyone here trying to bring it back up to what it was. I know the Weber State Democrats were critical in us flipping seats in the Ogden City Council race. In 2018, Weber County was the only county in Utah to flip a seat from red to blue outside of Salt Lake County. And that was a big part of the college Democrats and them going out, knocking doors, encouraging their fellow student body to register to vote.
And that seat was Rosemary Lesser's, right?
That is the seat that Representative Lesser holds now.
That's right.
It was Lou Shurtleff that flipped it.
Gotcha.
And then Lou Shurtleff won it again in 2020, again due to the help of the Weber State Democrats.
Gotcha. Awesome. So, I mean, this is just kind of my next question is, how do you think these November elections coming up in Utah are going to go, just from the local level? Like I said, Rosemary Lesser, I think it's the only Democrat in the Utah State Legislature in general outside of the Salt Lake area and that kind of thing. How do you think those elections are going to go? And what do you even think about the presidential level? And I asked that, like, specifically, do you think that Harris has the ability to outperform Biden's 2020 margin? Because Biden, I think he almost cracked 40%, or something like that. And I was watching a political analysis video for someone who's been in polling and politics for decades, and he said that they're going to take a close look at Utah and what it does on the presidential level, because if it goes less strong for Trump in 2024 than did in 2020, then that's a huge sign that they're just going to start, unloading a lot more investments in Utah. So,
yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity here in Utah, and I think there's a lot of positive numbers to look at. I think the fact that Utah was the lowest, Utah gave Donald Trump the lowest percentage he received in the state that he won in 2016, and I also believe that was the case in 2020, where in 2020, like you mentioned, President Biden did the best any Democrat had done in Utah since 1964 when President Johnson won the state. So that's really exciting. We're seeing demographic shifts with younger people, especially younger people in the LDS community. I point to the fact in 2022 we had a competitive U.S. Senate race with Evan McMullin and Mike Lee, and that was a real close one. And we ended up losing that. But I'll tell you, as the vice chairman for the Utah Democratic Party, I am a member of the National Party, so I'm a DNC committee member. And so after the 2022 election, we went to our we have a quarterly meeting, and so we went to our winter meeting, and I had the leaders of Arizona and Nevada thanking Utah. And I really didn't understand why, because we didn't win any of our national races. But they said that the amount of money that the Republicans had to put protecting Mike Lee, had they seen that money in Nevada and Arizona, where those were razor thin victories for us, they were convinced that we would have lost those seats in the Senate and the governor's race in Arizona had Utah not made a move to make the U.S. Senate race competitive. So we had that. And then also just this year, Nikki Haley, after she got out of the presidential primary, still did very well against Donald Trump. And I think she even won Davis County, which is a huge number and a task when you're not even running for office anymore. I think some things to look at is Salt Lake County right now has a minority on the county council. There's 3 county council seats that are very competitive right now, and they're going to determine whether or not we get the majority for the first time on the county council. I think Rosemary Lesser up here in Weber County. You have Angela Choberka, Stacey Bernal up here in Weber County that I think are positive ones. There is a Democrat running up in Logan for their county council seat in what is a real toss-up district. So if we can flip that, that would be great. And then Carbon County, so down in Price, used to be a very blue county. It actually was one of the bluest counties we had in Utah. After the 2016 election, they voted for Trump. We lost that House seat, the state House seat in Carbon County as well that same year. We've got some great candidates running, and I really think we have an opportunity to take back Carbon County. So those are some of the local races that I think we can take a look at and see how they do. The other thing to keep in mind with all these local elections is with the courts ruling that Amendment D was unconstitutional, we will see next year fair maps drawn, because we saw the legislature playing this game of when we passed a citizen initiative in 2018 saying we want an independent commission drawing the lines of our politicians. The legislature ignored it and said, no, these are the lines we're going to draw. And so I think that is also really exciting. If we get a competitive congressional race, there's a lot of folks in DC and the DNC that are talking to us about seeing more money put into Utah. So a lot of great things happening.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And the thing about the money Mike Lee and the RNC had to spend on defending Mike Lee's seat, I didn't even think about that as to a reason why, a lot of Republicans lost in 2022. Like, it's crazy. I mean, I was watching the Nevada margin. People were sure that Senator Cortez Masto was going to lose, and she held on. Even the governor, Joe Lombardo there, he lost to the Republican, more of a moderate Republican, but he still lost nonetheless. But then Masto barely hung on. I think that was the most competitive of any of the Senate races that year. So, I mean, that's a good point, that even if we don't necessarily win the next few elections, even if we make it competitive, that reverberates all around the country. What would you say is the best strategy for uniting the Democratic Party around candidates and platforms like that of Kamala Harris, and maybe even the left more generally? Because you see a lot of people, especially students, who don't really like the Democratic Party. I mean, you have people, Tess was just telling me a little bit earlier about how they don't really like the two-party system. They think that, they're more so on the left and that kind of thing. But nonetheless, they're for Kamala Harris, just because, she knows it's the better,
better of two evils.
Yeah, pretty much.
For a lack of better words. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and that's a good point. My wife is also against the two-party system, and she's married to someone who is one of the leaders of one of the two parties. So I think it's a fair ask of, what is the purpose of a two-party system, and can we see a third party come about? What I've always loved about the Democratic Party is that we've never fully been a united party. I mean, if you look at the the foundings of the party, and even over 100 years ago, I mean, when Harry Truman was getting the nomination in 48, you had the Dixiecrats walk out because he was for desegregating the army.
Yeah.
You had Democrats that when Obama got the nomination in 2008, they said the women of the party would never, come together behind Barack Obama. And so what I've always liked about the Democratic Party, and this is me, I get that it's not for everyone, but when you can have Nancy Pelosi and Joe Manchin running under the same party banner, that goes to show that we are more about the individual and the person versus what the Republicans tend to do, which is this purity test. Here is our platform, and you need to check all these boxes, and at the very bottom, you need Donald Trump's endorsement. And if you can't fill all these, you're done. I mean,
Exactly.
Mitt Romney, who was the standard bearer of the party in 2012, and everyone in Utah, all the Republicans loved Mitt Romney. Now he didn't run for re-election because he knew he was going to lose. That's how far the Republican Party has shifted. So I don't know if we'll ever get to a point as Democrats that we will agree on everything.
Yeah.
But I think what we have to do as Democrats is agree that it's okay for us to have maybe different policy items that are our priority, but as long as we are moving forward, progressing, the livelihood and the quality of life for everyone, that's what our policies should fall through. So whether it's environmental, whether it's LGBTQ, whether it's women's reproductive rights, whatever your issue is, I think it's great. That's your issue. But hopefully we as Democrats have this mindset of we want our policies and whatever your issue is to be something that's under the umbrella of bettering, your neighborhoods for your family, your friends.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I do got a question for you. So
Yeah.
especially like talking about like the left not being necessarily like, like how the right is, where it's like, oh, you have to follow these exact follow commitments and stuff like that.
Yeah.
With the right tactics and stuff like that, they very much use fear, and fear has been a very big tactic, if that be fear mongering or anything else, or just blaming another party for any actions, or even a book that has nothing to do with anything that they talk about and stuff. How has the fear that the right and the Republicans have implemented affected how you guys run as Democrats and stuff like that?
I think that's something that we as Democrats are still working on, is what is the message that works? Because I would maybe take what you said and push back a little bit, that I don't know if it's fear. I think they've gotten to the point it's hate. That is what it is.
Yeah.
And we as the Democratic Party, I think, really struggle with this mindset of, well, we're not going to counter hate with hate.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's a question that's still ongoing, is what is the counter to that? Is it hope that Obama brought in 2008? Is it basic sanity that Biden, really campaigned on in 2020? Let's just get back to having someone who's respected, across the globe. But I think what Harris is really doing in talking about kitchen table issues is really, really important. Because it doesn't matter if you are a voter in Utah, it doesn't matter if you're a voter in the South, or if you're a California voter. I think kitchen table issues are critical. I think we can do a better job on messaging that in a word, because again, the Republicans, they have fear, they have hate. That's what they're campaigning on.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this smoke screen and mirrors of, you need to hate this guy that looks differently than you because they're the reason that you're not able to pay for groceries and bills.
Yeah.
But no one's talking about the uber wealthy paying their fair share and what that would do if they were actually paying any taxes, just like the rest of us.
100%. Yeah.
And I mean, something that I kind of think, just to go back to the other question, just about uniting the Democratic Party, I think it would be cool, and I think this is one of the only good things that Trump has contributed to American politics, I think, is that we see like some moderate Republicans, maybe they're like Romney Republicans and that kind of thing. They have basically, in effect, even if they're still registered Republicans, become Democrats because they are so focused on preserving democracy. And then there's other extremist issues that will unite all of us, even like the, conservative Republicans who've, turned to the Democrats, like the extreme abortion bans and stuff like that. So I think it's actually kind of fitting that it's called the Democratic Party because we are the party of democracy. The other party can't say the same thing. And that unites us, even though we do, skew to the left a little bit. I mean, it's like, it technically doesn't matter how conservative you are. You just have to reject the extremism from, the top of the Republican Party, basically. But yeah, I mean, if we don't have anything else to say about that, I mean, I also wanted to bring this up because this is a big talking point from the right and even some of the left. As I've seen them making a point about this on like programs, like I don't know if you guys know, like the Young Turks and stuff like that, is that Democrats have some level of culpability for propping up Biden before that, that debate performance where arguably he kind of lost his train of thought, he kind of fumbled, and a lot of people saw that and they thought, well, he cognitively isn't there. Like the Democrats, they put him up there, they stuck with him for that long. Now here's this disaster. Like, what do you think about people who would say it was a mistake for Democrats to stick with him as long as they did? And then also, I mean, this is a different point, but it's kind of ridiculous. So I guess you don't have to make much of this if you don't want to, but how the right says it's unfair that we switched out Biden for Harris, even though it was his decision to drop out. So
I think kind of addressing the first part, I've met President Biden a few times now. I've worked with his administration at the White House to get real tangible things done here for Utah, right? This isn't, I think what Donald Trump did in his last 4 years was promise a lot of false goods that never came to be, right? I mean, how many times did he talk about a wall that someone else was going to pay for and no one, that didn't happen. So if someone wants to talk about Biden stumbling or him not being able to speak without stuttering, I'd say please pull up a video of him throughout his time in public office where he wasn't able to do that. He's had a stutter his whole life. He's not this polished politician, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah.
And what he has been able to do in his time in office is historical. We have not seen a president since probably the 60s that has accomplished what he's been able to accomplish. Just here in Utah, we've seen over 70,000 new homes get internet with his broadband internet. We're seeing hundreds of thousands of jobs created. He is protecting and preserving our public lands and fighting to ensure that we have the finances to invest in the Great Salt Lake. So, the Republicans are going to say what they're going to say. I mean, and again, it's hard because their guy has been out of office for 4 years. But we have to remember this is a guy that was saying that we won the American Revolution because we took over the airports.
Yeah.
This is the guy that said, if you inject bleach, that's going to help you from COVID. So I would say, look. Maybe don't cast stones if it's glass houses, and if they're concerned about Biden's mental fitness, what I've told my Republican friends is said, look, we felt like President Biden was not going to be able to win this election, so we made a move to have Kamala Harris be the nominee.
Hmm.
You know, now it's your guy who is the
Yeah.
oldest nominee. Now it's your guy that, so if you want to talk about mental stability in our nominees, fine. Joe Biden is no longer the nominee. Again, the Republicans will continue to placate and they will continue to point the finger, but they will not hold themselves accountable to the same standard that they want to hold us to. And we as Democrats can't, we have to stop trying to accommodate their wishes or what they want to see from us, because we're never going to see it back.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that is a good point. I mean, that being said, I mean, we did make the move to, I guess, sort of push him to drop out, and he did, and it was his decision. So, I mean, like the idea that it's unfair or anything, I find it kind of ironic that Trump and other Republicans will be like, oh, well, Biden got this many votes and then they switched him out. And it's like, well, one, it was his decision. Two, most of those Democrats, after watching that debate, wanted him to drop out, or at least
Yeah.
a huge percentage of them.
Well, and something else that I would add too is all those voters, millions of voters that voted in the Democratic primaries, they did not vote for Joe Biden. They voted for Biden and Kamala Harris. It was a ticket that they voted for.
Yeah.
One. The other thing is, and this is more complicated because a lot of people don't understand how the nominating processes work with the Democrats and the Republicans, but the way the Democrats do it is, when Biden got the nomination, he was able to get delegates, and delegates were voted by Democrats in their states, in their respective states, to represent the wishes of their states at the convention.
Yeah.
Joe Biden didn't get the nomination because of all the votes he received across the country. He was the presumptive nominee because of all the delegates that he had. And so when President Biden said, I'm no longer running, I am releasing my delegates, that is we followed our rules to the T. There was no rules that had to be amended. There was nothing like that to say now it needs to be
Yeah.
Vice President Harris. And my final point on that is, these Republicans are acting like we plucked some, congressman from Nebraska to be the nominee. We nominated the Vice President of the United States, who has been a heartbeat away from the Oval Office for the last 4 years and was elected overwhelmingly. The largest popular vote a ticket has ever received was Biden and Kamala Harris 4 years ago, where the majority of Americans said, we know that President Biden is older, and we know that Kamala Harris could be president any day, and they voted her in. So again, Republicans make it seem like we snuck in this, deputy undersecretary of transportation to sneak into this. No, this is the Vice President of the United States.
Yeah.
I think something that's actually really interesting about that is that, she is the vice president. She is younger. She is, definitely, like, I feel like the younger generation is definitely more leaning towards her. However, something that I keep hearing from my fellow students and fellow friends and stuff like that is them feeling like their votes don't matter. Because when it does come down to election day, it's the Electoral College that really puts in that vote. And repeat of history is what we're feeling like we're seeing. Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Clinton still won the popular vote while Trump still won the election. Do you think that the Electoral College is still going to vote for Kamala Harris? And do you think our votes matter in any sense that we should vote?
So I do believe that that Harris will win this election. I think it's going to be closer than a lot of us want, right? I think we as Democrats would love nothing more than a 350 electoral vote landslide. I think it is going to be closer, but her campaign, me and the state party, we work with her campaign daily. And are getting updates. They are raising $10 to $15 million a day. They have some of the best political minds in the country working on her campaign. But to the point of, folks that say, my vote doesn't matter. In the electoral college, yeah, it's a little bit rough. But if we're ever going to get Utah to a point like Colorado, Nevada, Arizona, we need everyone voting. We need everyone voting, because if we were at 40% in 2020 and we can get to 42%, that's how we get the national parties looking at us and focusing on us. But the other thing I would say is the president election is always one that gets the attention. It always does. But the local elections matter more. Those are going to impact your daily lives. I mean, just here at Weber State, it was the state legislature that got rid of the DEI office. Even the city council mayor races tend to not get as much publicity. But if you want to talk about taxes, if you want to talk about potholes, if you want to talk about like fighting intergenerational poverty here in Ogden, those are the elections that matter. And also in Utah, some of these races are decided by a slim margin. In 2016, we had a Democrat running in Salt Lake that lost by 3 votes. Here in Weber County, we had a state Senate race that was decided by 20 votes. Local elections matter. It's hard to get people to focus on local elections. But I think the Utah Republican-controlled legislature is giving us a lot of ammo to tell folks this is what's happening in Utah. Stop focusing on what's going on or not going on in D.C. This is the stuff that's happening in your own backyard.
For sure.
I mean, I think, that's a great point. I think a lot of the time people are starting to pay more attention to the down ballot races and that kind of thing. And I think that's also why, just to go back to like what we think will actually happen in the presidential election, I always just kind of harp back to 2022 when a lot of the polls said that the statewide Democrats, even in the swing states, almost every single one of them were going to lose, and then almost every single one of them won. And that kind of gives me hope that the polls are actually underestimating Democrats this time, which will be kind of just like a mind-blowing thing, because usually they had been underestimating Trump. But if they underestimated Democrats in 2022, a lot of the reason for that, I think, is just because of the Dobbs decision to overturn Roe versus Wade. And they couldn't account for those voters switching to the Democrats. I think that it's possible that Harris wins the Electoral College by, or at least the crucial swing states. I think it's possible she wins them by more than Biden, even if the popular vote is closer. So I think we might, and I mean, I might be dead wrong, but I honestly think we might be looking at a situation where the Electoral College is actually more beneficial to us than we might be thinking it is.
Yeah, I mean, when Harris came in, she expanded the map, right? North Carolina, even Florida were kind of, long shots for Biden. So I think we've expanded the map there. I think you're right. With the polling, right? Everyone pointed to the polls that 2022 was going to be a rough time for the Democrats, and it wasn't. Republicans continue to point at the polls of 2016, 2020 and say they're wrong, the polls are wrong. Okay, so let's look at the money. Democrats are outspending Republicans by a mass amount. Let's look at volunteers and volunteer shifts that are being completed. For a campaign that started up in the span of 3 months, the Harris-Walz campaign is knocking doors, making phone calls, doing everything they need to. And same with what we're doing here in Utah. Just today, we've made over 8,500 calls to Democrats across the state.
Wow. Well, that's some heavy work you guys are doing there. So, I mean, this is my last question, I guess specifically to you, but this is something I want all of us to kind of chime in on, is kind of going back to the idea that, we all have our issues, but fall under the umbrella of the Democratic Party. Part of the reason why I wanted to do this is because there's an issue that's very, personal to me, and that's animal rights. So that's why I went vegan back in 2016. Ever since I was 13, I've been vegan. And that's just because I saw I was scrolling online and I saw a picture of basically a pig hanging upside down with their throat slit open. There was another pig cowering in the corner, and I just thought, wow, that's horrible. And I basically went vegan the next day. And I had been involved in the vegan movement and that kind of thing until I kind of realized that it really, like, boycott movements can only do so much, especially something like that where it's hard to get a lot of people to commit to it. And that's partly why I think we're in such an interesting position in the Democratic Party, in politics, to make systemic change towards these ends. And I think that I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on what you think about animal rights potentially over time through, just individual Democrats caring about it, eventually electing people who have those same kind of values to protect animals and that kind of thing. Just from some of the horrible things that happens, like, I mean, in the egg industry, like the male baby chicks, they're of no value, so they get thrown in a macerator and stuff like that. Just really awful things. And I also think it's also interesting because we spend so much money in subsidies to animal agriculture, and which oddly enough, a lot of Republicans support, but that goes against their whole philosophy of the free market. But us Democrats, if we could take away those subsidies and use them for like social programs, so instead of using like taxpayers' money to do all these horrible things to animals, we could actually, expand Medicare, or save the Great Salt Lake and do all these different things. So yeah, I just wanted to hear what you thought about that.
Yeah, I think I think animal rights are important. I think we as a party, we have to look and see what the outcomes are with those. When I was coming up here on campus, I was remembering the last time we had our state convention. So all the state delegates across Utah came to Weber State. Weber State hosted the state convention. This was 2017, and this is my favorite story to talk about Democrats, because this is how sometimes you get bogged down on the issues and not focus on the bigger things of how to get folks elected and stuff like that. As we held our elections for state party leaders. They were all voted in, and then it came to the platform, and so everyone wanted their issue to be the top of the platform. So we had to debate an hour on how we were going to organize it, and we finally came to an agreement. Okay, we'll do it alphabetically. So then that way, no one can say their issue is over another person's issue. It's just in the alphabet. So then we spent, I'm not kidding you guys, an hour and a half to the point that Weber State said, you guys have gone past your time. You guys need to leave. And we had to hold a second state convention to go over the platform. Is we had a debate for an hour and a half on whether or not the animal rights portion of our platform should be animal rights or animal protections.
Oh my God.
On whether or not that should be the title, not even the content of what it was, but animal rights versus animal protections should be the title. Hour and a half on that. So I think, I think it's important to have it in the policy. I think in regards to farmers and voters. So my job as the state party vice chair is to win as many elections as we can. Like, that is to support the candidates, everything like that. And so I think it's a good topic, and I think it's a good conversation on how can we get this to become an issue for undecided voters. Because for my office, what we look at is not how do we get voters like us that are in this room to vote, because we're in this room, right? We are passionate. And if we vote, we're probably going to vote for Democrats. And how do we get folks? I always think, how do I get folks like my brother to vote for us? My brother he loved Barack Obama. He wasn't able to vote for Obama. But he loved Barack Obama. So happy he won re-election in 2012. Voted for Clinton in 2016. Big Trump supporter now. So how do we get these voters back? And so I think animal rights is an important thing. But again, I think if we can tie it to kitchen table issues, I think that's the way we're going to win voters like my brother to come on board and vote alongside us. And I think that's something that we're going to have to look at for sure.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I just think it would be something that would be interesting. I think it would just be a natural progression of the Democratic Party platform just over time. I guess this is just one of my predictions. I think over time it will become something very central, kind of like abortion rights or something like that. Um, and this is something that, yeah, voters will have to move on, and I think over time they will, just as our circle of compassion kind of gets pushed. And that's kind of how I look at it. And not a lot of people think about it like this, is how, everyone's like, oh, all people are entitled to freedom and that kind of thing. But I mean, I would say all sentient beings are entitled to freedom and justice and equality. I mean, we wouldn't give cows the right to vote, for example, but I mean, that doesn't mean they have capabilities that wouldn't want to protect, such as their consciousness, ability to feel pain, stuff like that. Um, so I just find it interesting, and that's something I wanted to just contribute to the discussion. Um,
Yeah.
I posted on the Weber State Snapchat story. I posted this whole thing. Like, I basically made a post, and it was basically detailing all of Trump's history, basically sexually abusing women, and just pointing out, like, this is the guy the Republicans put up. Like, this is the guy that they say is like the embodiment of like masculinity and that kind of thing. Just some person who, he was best friends with Epstein. There's allegations he and Epstein sexually assaulted a 13-year-old together, like all these kinds of things. Found civilly liable for raping E. Jean Carroll, and I put that, and then someone just responded, and I think they saw it was with some just stupid like edit of Trump, and it was like all like the music and stuff, and just trying to make him look cool. And I was like, dude. And then I posted in it, and I was like, who do you think you're convincing with that? It's like that's for like only a 12-year-old would see that and think, oh, Trump is cool, like those kind of stuff. But then I kind of thought it would be interesting to kind of, for us to talk about some of their concerns, because then I did do another one, and I was like, well, if you're unsure about voting for Harris or you want to vote for Trump, like, what are some of your concerns? And we can respond to it in a podcast. So the first one was from a student named Sierra, and she says, what is she doing for abortion rights? So does anyone want to take a stab at that? Anyone have any ideas?
For Kamala Harris or just Republican?
Kamala Harris, about what she's done as vice president, or her contribution, anything like that. I have some stuff here. I just want to see if you guys had any.
Well, abortion right, I feel like is definitely like on the left, right? And like that's something that I feel like even though we can't like all come together, like that's something that like I feel like most of us like feel like that's something that needs to be there, because it's not only abortion, right? It's reproductive rights, and it's birth control, it's healthcare, it's even like was it sexual education in schools and stuff like that. It's so much of a broader issue than just the abortion, yes or no. And it's like once we lose Roe v. Wade and stuff like that, it becomes such a bigger issue than just like, is it a yes, is it a no? And like a lot of states look at it like black and white, but there's so much gray area, and there's so much like once that is like taken out or is not taken out, there's so much benefits to actually have it there, from like, again, reproductive rights and sexual education. It's I think the most important thing about that is like giving women their well, not even just women, but like anyone that has those parts, their reproductive rights, because those are their parts. Those aren't men's parts. And I feel like that's kind of where I stab at that.
And that's a good point. I mean, what I had here was and that is very true. I mean, we even talked about that in my moral problems and philosophy class. We read this section of a textbook that was about how reproductive rights, that goes far beyond abortion. And this was written before, or no, not before Roe v. Wade, but before the Dobbs decision and that kind of thing. And you see how with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, kind of how it reverberates and that kind of thing, and everything it does. That's why it's just so important to safeguard it. But I mean, just even as her in her position as vice president, I mean, a lot of people want to say, oh, well, she's responsible for the stuff Biden did. Well, it's like, yeah, she's in the administration, but then she's also culpable for the successes. And they signed several executive orders aimed at protecting access to abortion medication through the FDA in all 50 states. And then she went on a reproductive freedoms tour, which is when she went mostly, I think, to like college campuses and that kind of thing all across the country, based on this issue prior to the election, before becoming the nominee. That was one of the reasons why I was excited when Biden passed the torch to her, because she can communicate on this issue. And as we've said, like with the 2022 midterms, that is such an important thing. But then also, and this goes for her other policy proposals where people are like, oh, well, why didn't she do it like as vice president or something? Like a lot of her proposals, including codifying Roe v. Wade, which she recently said she'd be fine with doing away with the filibuster to do, which I agree with. This is all hinges on the congressional elections and that kind of thing. So if she says, oh, I'm gonna, codify Roe v. Wade, she's not necessarily saying she could do it herself. She's saying after this next election, if Congress sends it to my desk, I will. It takes like a basic understanding of civics to get that, but I don't think a lot of people sort of understand that. They don't even really understand her role as vice president and what the vice president can do. But yeah.
Yeah. I think another thing that's important to point out is, how did we get here? How did we get to the Dobbs decision? And it is, since Roe v. Wade, the Republicans, so I mean, for the last 50 years, have spent a concerted effort to take over the courts. So I think we have to look at how we got here, and by, when folks say, oh, I can decide between, Clinton and Trump, it was the best of two evils or whatever. No, Donald Trump was able to put 3 Supreme Court justices on the court. So it's not just Donald Trump. It is anything the Supreme Court is ruling on, which has been, dark money. It has been reproductive rights. Clarence Thomas, openly said that, LGBT rights are on the table. So I think something that is really that I've been excited to see the Biden campaign do is they are currently outpacing Donald Trump in regards to court appointments. So they have appointed more judges than Donald Trump did at this point in Donald Trump's first term. So I think that is a huge thing that we're going to see in protecting reproductive rights, is them getting more female justices on the court, which they are doing, and also women of color on the courts.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And now Biden is proposing his Supreme Court reforms and that kind of thing, and that was inspired off of their presidential immunity decision, which I think was just atrocious. It's like, if before people didn't believe in Project 2025, I was like, oh, that's never going to happen. And it's like, well, that Supreme Court decision basically ensured that it could happen, because they said so many terrible things in it. And it's so crazy when you think about it, because we read parts of the Dobbs decision in that class I was talking about. You compare what they said in the presidential immunity decision to the Dobbs decision, how in overturning Roe v. Wade, they're like, oh, they didn't have the jurisdiction to make all these rulings about abortion. It's like they should have left it to the states. Like the Supreme Court's not a legislative body. They have no ability to make up stuff out of whole cloth. Well, it's like, well, we do have the right to privacy and freedom in the Constitution, with the 4th and 14th Amendments and that kind of thing. But then it's like with presidential immunity, they made up a whole bunch of ridiculous rules, like, oh, well, you can't even question a president's motives, to then charge him with, unofficial acts. So they tried to sort of look like they were going the middle of the road by saying official acts are protected, unofficial acts are not. Whereas they said even with unofficial acts, you cannot use government documents, you cannot use their motives, you cannot basically take anything that could be used in the court of law, all of that to help Trump. So if he gets back in office, he could, and this was one of the arguments of the Supreme Court, deploy SEAL Team 6 to go assassinate his political opponents. And even before this, there's something called the Insurrection Act, which there was reporting that he regretted not doing this in 2020 with the Black Lives Matter protests, deploying basically the military to round up protesters and I guess put them in camps and that kind of thing.
Let's not forget that he did
Yeah.
deploy the military. The military was deployed on the Black Lives Matter protests.
Yeah.
There was rubber bullets being used, and like especially when you talk about rubber bullets, those are not rubber. Those are hurt,
Yeah.
man. Those hurt.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like with the Insurrection Act, though, like that gives him basically unchecked power. Like they can basically go in and say, "Oh, there's public disturbances, there's chaos, and that's why the Insurrection Act exists is to do that." And then I just find it ridiculous how they did that just to help Trump. And I think the Supreme Court, that's one of the biggest stains that Trump has left on this country is the Supreme Court.
Still feeling it to this day, for sure.
And we will be. Like, if he gets back into office, I think it was said that, like, his appointments will have, like, a MAGA Supreme Court for, like, what, the next, like, was it, like, 25 years, like, something like that? Like, because those are lifetime appointments.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, if anything, I think it would be reasonable. And there's some debate on this, and there's a reason why the Constitution was written how it was, because they didn't want Supreme Court justices to be able to, have term limits, because then they might want to, I guess, do like a Hail Mary and get all their ideological priorities out of the way, like in a certain time frame, or sabotage someone, or think about their overall legacy or whatever. They want them to be like impartial, and the lifetime appointment was supposed to be like that, but it's just not right. Like with how it is.
Especially with the advancements and everything, especially like the life expectancy being
Yeah.
way more
Yeah.
than what it was when it was first written. I don't think the Constitution necessarily is definitely able to stand up to our advancements in technology and our advancements in healthcare and our advancements in pretty much every other field. I don't think they could have ever foreseen this, and it's been doing a great job so far, but there's only so much that we can rely on that to where there needs to be amendments. I feel like when it comes to like stuff like that, where it's like lifetime appointments become ridiculous amounts of power, especially when lifetime expectancy can go all the way up from like 80 to 90 to even 100, and it's like it's crazy when you talk about lifetime appointments.
Yeah.
This sort of comment, there's another one on the Weber State Snapchat story where someone said, "Trump 2024, I want affordable groceries, thanks." And I responded to that with something that said something along the lines of, well, Trump's tariffs would amount to basically a national sales tax on all imported items and costs typical middle-income American households, economists has projected. Some projections are even higher, up to like 4,000, but $2,500 in added expenses to a typical middle-income American households, expenses every single year. And then something I think a lot of people and more people are recognizing this, but still more people need to, is the reason for high prices. It's not because of like real inflation or anything. It's because of price gouging. It's not Biden and Harris. Inflation has significantly fell from its peak. I think the peak was like 8 or 9%, and then it went all the way down. I think it's now around like 3.2, 3.4, something like that. And it's like there's a really good graph that I wish more people would see, where it shows the cost of doing business and how it went up during the pandemic. And then when the pandemic, started to, dwindle out and everything, the cost of doing business went down a little bit, but the price they were charging for their products, it basically stayed the same, even past the time. So they're like, oh, well, Americans, they're already paying this high price, and they're not blaming us, they're blaming Biden. So it's like, okay, well, let's just continue charging them that to
Don't
get the
forget about
profit.
shrinkflation too. Them
Yeah.
taking less of the product and us paying more for the product.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
So I mean, and then again, it's like, if anything, you could look to like they like you blaming Biden because they're gonna get all these tax cuts from Trump, which also is another thing that's gonna balloon the deficit. He wants a $5 trillion tax cut rather than, I think it was like a $2 trillion tax cut in 2017 or $3 trillion. It's like is just insane. People and I think there was a poll that showed a majority of Americans now do actually blame corporate price gouging for it. Um, but it just needs to happen more and more. I think there's a very big tendency to just blame whatever's happening in the country on the president. And this even goes back, like in my history class, we were learning about the Great Depression and how the homeless people and that kind of thing, they would make these little camps, and they would call them Hoovervilles, to basically named after the president Herbert Hoover, kind of like how they say Bidenflation, even though, I mean, Herbert Hoover, he was a horrible president, but he didn't cause the Great Depression, per se. So it's just this kind of simplistic notion of everything that happens, especially with the economy, is all the president's fault. Um, so I mean, that's kind of what I'd say to anyone who would kind of have that sentiment, which unfortunately is a lot of people. But yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think price gouging is a huge thing. The Republicans love to point the blame. I mean, you've got folks that are struggling in the South with these hurricanes and windstorms, and you get Matt Gaetz tweeting about how Biden is doing nothing to get it done.
Yeah.
And then I think it was Congressman Jerry Connolly commented on that and said, we had 3 bills to help them get funding that you and the rest of the Florida Republican delegation voted down. I mean, it's astronomical what they will do to point the blame and not provide common sense, not provide a real explanation of how they're getting to this logic, but they're going to say it and it's going to stick.
Yeah. And there's just all the misinformation going around. It's just ridiculous. So, I mean, an issue more specific to Utah that I wanted to talk about was there's recently an article written in the Deseret News by Representative Mike Schultz, who's as the Utah House Speaker, a Republican, of course. So he said, quote, and this is about kind of the federal lands in Utah. A lot of the geographic portion of Utah is owned federally, and a lot of Republicans like to, hem and haw about this. So this is kind of what he said. He said the federal government's approach underscores a troubling trend that makes it clear that managing Utah's public lands from Washington, D.C. is not the solution. That's why Utah is asserting its right to manage our lands. We believe in local stewardship, proven through our track record of responsibly managing state lands for the benefit of all Utahns and future generations. Already, Utah's state and local governments bear the brunt of the management burden, a nearly impossible task made even more daunting under the new restrictive regulations. When a crisis strikes, like a raging wildfire or spring flooding, our hands are bound with red tape, forcing us to seek permission before deploying critical resources. The federal government's failures in wildlife control, flood prevention, and water management are both a burden on our state and proof that Utah can do better. That's why Utah has filed a legal suit asking the U.S. Supreme Court to address whether the federal government can simply hold unappropriated lands within the state indefinitely. Federal lands dominate Utah's landscape, with the federal government controlling 2/3 of the state's entire land from their offices in Washington, D.C. The federal government insists it knows best while forcing policies that leave locals to pay the price. Conservation should involve both protecting the land and allowing for sustainable use. We have proven our public lands can remain accessible and productive for all. The short-term thinking of people who suggest that locking the gate and throwing away the key, restricting access, that's a great thing, could only come from people who have never experienced a night under Utah stars. It's time for a different approach. By fostering collaboration and respecting multiple use principles, we can conserve and actively manage our lands. The state of Utah can and will apply policies that will benefit the environment and support Utah's tradition of spending time on our beloved public land. So, I mean, I don't know if anyone else kind of catches this, but I mean, his use of sustainable use and that kind of thing. It's clear why they want this land to not be controlled by the federal government. Because in 2017, Donald Trump, he significantly reduced the size of these two, huge national monuments in Utah. It's the Bears Ears National Monument and the Grand Staircase Escalante is actually the largest rollback of federal protection of a national monument in U.S. history, right here in Utah. Um, I mean, yeah, he cut the bear's ears from roughly 1.3 million acres to roughly 228 100,000, or yeah, 228,000. Only about 15% of its original size. Grand Staircase was reduced by roughly half from its nearly 1.9 million acres to about 1 million. And it's clear that this is because they want to extract oil and they want to basically destroy our public lands for, I guess, the economy. It's really to just put money in the pockets of their friends and big oil and that kind of thing. And I just think they're trying to say, oh, well, we want to, have sustainable use and that kind of thing. It's like, yeah, so like we're going to trust that with all the things that Republicans do, how they don't care about the environment, they oppose even the most modest of environmental restrictions. They don't believe in climate change, like their dear leader thinks climate change is a hoax. So it's like, I think it's a very good thing that they're not controlled by the Utah government, because who knows what they do with them. Maybe some of them they'll still let people, do these things like, bike riding and off-roading and camping and all that kind of thing. But at the same time, it's like, are you telling me there's land there that is that it would be usable for extracting oil, and the Republicans aren't gonna, lease that out? And it's like, no, it's like I don't trust that for a second. And with the far right legislature, and I call it the far right echo chamber of a legislature, because the huge supermajority there, it's like I don't trust them for 1 second. So I actually think, at least with President Biden or Kamala Harris, I prefer that land to be federal land. I wish this wasn't the case. Like if Utah was a blue state and I had trust that they would safeguard the environment, I would take a different position and be like, no, the state should be able to manage this land. But it's like, it's just, I don't think we can trust Republicans with managing this land. So yeah, I was just wondering what you kind of thought about that, or
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna go on a tangent with this. I don't know if you guys want to add anything before I go off on my.
I just would want to add, like, taking it from the federal level to the state level to remove so many other benefits that you are receiving from the federal level, like even working with like National Forest Service and stuff like that. That's all federal. It's like, the moment that you take that away, now you're going through the state, and it's like, it might create more jobs, it might, destroy the environment and stuff like that, but you're losing all these other resources that isn't just exactly going through the state, and it's like going through federal, and it's like has all this restrictions and stuff, and it protects the land. And the reason that it's there to protect the land is to protect the land. And they got all these resources, and that's their only job, is to like protect it. But yet we're still over here like saying like, no, state should do that. And it's like I don't see not only do I see like us having the funding to maintain it on a state level with our massive like amounts of just land and everything like that, which I think is possible, but it's going to be a burden to do that nevertheless. I think having it under federal regulation is one, best for protection, but also two, like I think that's financially like a better decision. And that's all my opinion, obviously, and like I would have to research more on the topic to like give you exact numbers, but just seeing how they do it with the service and stuff like that, I feel like it would be a lot harder on a state level.
So I've known Mike for probably 4 or 5 years now. I've known Mike Schultz, and he is absolutely full of crap. He is a liar, and he has this stuff with the about the federal government, with federal lands. What he doesn't want is he does not want public lands to remain in public hands. Really, we are going to give the Utah legislature, that is overwhelmingly real estate agents, developers. That's how Mike made his money, was being a developer and making McMansions all across Davis County. Really, we're going to give them the power to be over these majestic, beautiful lands. Some of our parks are the most beautiful in the country, and we are going to say, the Utah legislature, you guys keep that, and we're not expecting mavericks in the middle of these parks. We are not expecting, the amazing mountainsides of Moab being filled with these mansions. Again, we've got to look at what this legislature is and what they've done. When we talk about the housing crisis that, shocker, they've created, their solution now that Governor Cox and Mike is, touting and saying, oh my goodness, we found the solution, is to give tax incentives to these same developers. So what we now have a legislature whose mindset is to fix the housing problem is we're going to give tax incentives to these developers. So we as taxpayers are paying these developers to make more houses that they are going to, quote, be affordable, meaning that it's going to be $300,000, $400,000 instead of $500,000 plus houses. That is giving the fox the keys to the hen house and saying, you know what? The rooster down the street really doesn't have the best interests of the hens. The fox is there every single day walking around that coop. We need to give the keys to the hen house to the fox. Yeah. Absolutely ridiculous. And Mike knows it too. You talk to legislators, he's got as much brain cells as this microphone. Mike Schultz is no friend of mine.
Wow. That's a good point. I didn't even necessarily even think about all the real estate, but that makes a whole lot of sense. You can build houses anywhere. And I'm sure there's some, with how beautiful it is, like some rich people just sell it off to the highest bidder. They'll just have their mansion built there.
And we're seeing it. We're seeing it in Utah. Utah is seeing one of the largest numbers of second and third homes. So these homes that are being built, and there's the Utah legislature and the governor's like, oh my gosh, we're getting all these homes built. Who's purchasing them and for what purpose? It is individuals that are purchasing homes in southern Utah that's beautiful, but that's their second home. That's their second residence. Or Airbnbs. I was down in Torrey, which for anyone listening that doesn't know where Torrey is, it's right outside one of our biggest national parks. I've talked to the mayor of Torrey. He says that they have to have a cap on Airbnbs because everyone is purchasing this land in Torrey, but they're not wanting to build homes and pay their taxes and invest in the small business community there. They are building these so they have a vacation home and then they can Airbnb it to folks that have no real interest or roots in the community. Yeah. So that's what we're saying. So when we talk about this idea of them building more homes, McMansions for these lands, we're already seeing it. We are already seeing it. It is Democrat leaders in Salt Lake County that are pushing these ideas of smaller homes, different complexes. We've got the mayor here in Ogden touting these apartment complexes that are being built. Has anyone looked to see how much these apartments are going for? Those apartments are 2 times what my first mortgage was, in my first home. It is ridiculous. And so, when Mike and the Republicans go off on public lands, I'm like, that is such a cop-out. And let's also give Mike and the Republicans a history lesson. How did we get these national parks? Who was fighting for preservation of these parks? Their beloved Teddy Roosevelt, a Republican. Mm-hmm. These same regulations that they talk about, that the government is all these regulations and the government shouldn't regulate businesses. It was Teddy Roosevelt that pushed these regulations because there was literal rat feces in meat products. That is what happens when we go away from this. But it was their own Republican, progressive Teddy Roosevelt that pushed for these national parks, for this exact reason, to stop people like Mike Schultz. So, when we talk about how everyone has their issue in the platform, I think most of your viewers are finding out that parks are pretty high up on on my own personal platform. So thank you for coming to my TED Talk and my rant.
No, I think that's perfect, and this is why I wanted people like you, people involved in the politics of the state, because a lot of you guys that just have insight that we don't know just on a surface level, or even trying to look into it, just things that it's hard to find information about. So yeah, and I think just that kind of characterization of the legislature, like giving the fox the keys to the hen house, like I think that could be said about a lot of things. I think that's what Amendment D kind of was
Yes.
that you pass something by ballot referendum, they can just disregard it or change it, or do what they did with the fair maps.
Well, and now what we're hearing is this next legislative session. The session, I believe, begins the third. I think it's the third Tuesday of January is when the session is. It's 45 days. So the Utah Supreme Court said, no, you cannot change this referendum. Specifically, though, because a lot of people say, oh, so the citizens can pass any referendum and the legislature can't edit it. No. What they said was you cannot edit or change a referendum that impacts the government. If the people say they want to reform their government, they have the right to reform their government. And today, it was just announced about an hour or two ago that Amendment A, that was going to take money away from public education, they ruled that unconstitutional. So what is the Utah legislature and Mike Schultz and his cronies planning on doing now? They want to reform the judges. They want to reform the courts. They want to figure out, I've heard we may be seeing judges are now going to be elected, because that's a great idea. That, that we should have these judges be elected. I mean, this is what they are constantly doing. When they were getting very good good results from our education system and our teachers, their solution was, what we really need to do? We need to make the state school board partisan, so people can really know if they're voting for a Republican or a Democrat, because there were actually Democrats on the Utah school board. So they changed it and said, these races need to be partisan. So this is what they're doing constantly. When they are told no, when the schools said, no, we know how to do this, we are the experts in teaching our kids and what the kids need, they move it. So we are now seeing such a partisanship in our state school board. And now when the courts have said, hey, you guys have stepped out of line, now we're going to see in January all these bills coming forward on reforming our courts so they have absolute power. Yeah. It is, and this is why I say it is so important to vote, because the local stuff matters. Like, we have Republicans, and I've spoken to former Republican Party chairs. They're seeing the same thing we're seeing. Utah is turning more purple, and this is why you see Mike Schultz cowering with his Republican allies to try to pull as much power as possible, because they know what's coming. They know that voters in Utah, even Republican Utah voters, are not MAGA voters.
Yeah.
So they're redrawing their districts. They're trying to take over the courts. They're taking over our classrooms. If this isn't a sign for people to get up off the couch and make calls, knock doors, register to vote, and vote at least, I don't know what is.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great point. And also, I mean, I think one of the most disturbing examples of this was when the courts, tied up. There were multiple bills aimed at restricting abortion that got tied up. I mean, there was the one which was, it was basically a flat out abortion ban. There was no weakened pregnancy that you could get an abortion under that bill. And it got tied up in the courts. And then I think this bill did pass to where basically they'd give the attorney general the power to try to intimidate the courts into giving them more reasoning why they ruled it, and to maybe even make them reverse the decision. So it's like, in their pursuit of restricting an American's fundamental right to make decision about their own body, they're also going to circumvent our system of checks and balances. And it's like, and this is the party that claims to be the party of the Constitution, of patriotism, and that kind of thing. Well, it's like, not only are they infringing on the values in which America was founded, which is being against tyrannical government by them being tyrannical government, they're also just straight up circumventing the constitutional principles of checks and balances. I just think that is just absolutely ridiculous what they were trying to do with that.
Yeah, no, they are taking away the powers of. You're exactly right. They're taking away the checks and balance system, and they're taking away our own individual rights. The lady who asked the question about what Kamala Harris is doing for women's reproductive rights. That is a great question, but I would challenge that individual to say, what is happening in Utah with reproductive rights? Carrie Ann Lisenby, who is a state representative, a Republican in Davis County, her district is maybe a 20-minute drive from here. When they passed the restrictive abortion ban, Carrie Ann Lisenby, and sorry if this is too graphic, but I'm using her words. Carrie Ann Lisenby said that it was the responsibility of the women to control whether or not a man ejaculates in her.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that is what is happening here in Utah. And so when we talk about what Harris will or won't do, you're exactly right. Harris can only do what Congress is going to allow her to do. But right now, the Dobbs decision gave it to the states. Donald Trump says, I love that the states get to decide. The Utah legislature is making some very scary decisions on what we are able to do with our own bodies, who we can love. They want to control what we're doing in our bedrooms. And when there's other entities, again, these checks and balances saying, hey, you can't do that, now they're trying to take over those. It is terrifying what is happening in Utah. Folks say, you're a Democrat in Utah. How can you continue to just be involved? And, it's kind of running into a brick wall. And what I say is, how can you not?
Yeah.
Seeing what's happening, how can you not be involved to some degree? Maybe, you don't have to be the vice chair of the Utah Democratic Party, but show up to a campaign event, show up the party. I know you guys here on campus are planning events. Show up to an event. Listen to this podcast so you get to know some more about what's going on and hearing from great Democrats who are involved, right? So we need people to stay involved because it is scary what's happening here in Utah if we just turn a blind eye to it.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point. I think that's a great point to kind of end off on. If anyone has anything else to add to the podcast before we.
Yeah, just one last thing. Like, I think you've already kind of said it. It's like, the people are almost afraid of the government at this point, to where it's like what they're doing and what they're taking. It's like the people shouldn't be afraid of the government. I feel like the government should be afraid of the people, because we have the voice, we have the change, we can do so much. And it's like people should be going out and voting. People should be going out and saying, their opinion. And even if it is a podcast, like, it's still getting our voices out there. I think like the people need to be heard, because if we're not, then it's just going to run rampant. It's just going to be a circus.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with that.
And I mean, I think, and part of why I wanted to start this group is just because, and I'm very interested on Monday asking like Rosemary Lesser this, is, how does it feel being in a room which is so much of like an echo chamber of all these right-wing voices, where not only do they not want to acknowledge your voice, they want to stop you from having a voice through, cutting checks and balances, through voter suppression laws, through all these kinds of things. They just want to dominate you and have their, opinion be seen as the fact, just based on their ideology, and they don't want any pushback. And that's why, some of these people, even in the Weber State Snapchat stories, who might also be college students, they're like, they just try to troll and hate on us and hate on me specifically, because they're like, oh, well, you're trying to fight for things to be different. It's like, yeah, of course I am. It's like, look at what's going on, around Utah. So, I mean, I just think it's so important that the Democrats, be more active. And that's why we do weekly meetings. We're doing 3 other events this month. So yeah, we're going to try to do more.
Well, I love what you guys are doing. And, I hope folks that hear this don't think it's all doom and gloom. You know, when folks say, you know, what can you do? You can't get this done. Folks were saying that to the women that were getting the right to vote. They were saying that to Martin Luther King and those that said, absolutely not, you're never going to get simple rights. They said the same thing about healthcare. They said the same thing about gay marriage. You know, so I think it's important to know that like we can make a difference. We can stop this. This can be a lot to some people, or most people. It's a lot, but when there's folks starting up clubs on campus, having podcasts, again, just looking up factual news sources to stay well educated and bring that up to their friends and family in a respectful way. That is how we move the needle, and that is how we change this dialogue to, maybe getting a more diverse political system in Utah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. So yeah, thank you all for joining, especially Oscar Matta, the Vice Chair of the Utah Democratic Party. We're really moving up in the world here. So yeah, have a good one. I never know how to end it.
Yeah.